Hello and a warm welcome to this month's edition of the DuPont Collaboration Series. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. Now, apart from food security, ensuring that enough healthy, nutritious food is available is perhaps one of the most critical challenges globally. The need for both affordable and nutritious food to feed growing populations on the African continent is also of significant concern. On this edition of the show, we'll be taking a closer look at the role of nutrition in the agriculture value chain, from crop development right through to food distribution. And joining me in studio today to share their insights is Zacharias Caracristou. He's the regional president at DuPont Nutritional and Health, and he is responsible for the South America and Sub-Saharan Africa region. We also have Professor Cheryl Hendricks. She's a director at the Institute for Food, Nutrition and Wellbeing, this at the University of Pretoria. And also in the desk in Johannesburg, we have Stefan Engels. He's the country manager for Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and this is in Mozambique. And from our bureau in Nairobi, we're joined by Rosemary Ngaruro. She's the chief in the nutrition division, this in the Ministry of Health in Kenya. Welcome everyone to the desk. Perhaps let's come directly to you first, Zacharias. I mean, the stats speak for themselves. 9 out of the 46 sub-Saharan African countries are on track to achieve their first Millennium Development Goal, that of eradicating poverty and hunger. Why are African countries failing to translate their arable land into viable agricultural industries, one, but also into nutritionally sufficient populations?
Well, it takes time and it takes a lot of efforts from all the stakeholders. We remember from the beginning of our goals in terms of food security to work together in a collaboration way, collaborating with NGOs, collaborating with academy, collaborating with the food industry in terms of helping to find a way. We put ourselves some very strong goals in terms of reaching 2020, investments of $10 billion in R&D for food, but also a lot of help in terms of education of youngsters for about food and nutrition, and also working together with farmers, 3 million farmers, in order to raise this awareness. Being all together, I think we'll be able to get this thing at least accelerate and get things done.
Cheryl, let me come to you, man. 2 points that Zacharias raises that stand out for me is the question of time and the question of collaboration. What is it going to take to have a more integrated approach to addressing the nutritional insufficiency that we're seeing in Africa?
It's going to take a massive commitment from governments to come up with clear strategies for comprehensive approaches to agriculture and food security, to improve the system across the entire value chain. And this is going to take all the partners working together, from farmers to governments to the international aid agencies, as well as the private sector, which is emerging now for the first time after 30 years. I'm
going to play devil's advocate for a little bit with you, Stefan. I mean, we know the figures. We know that by 2050, the world could be sitting at a 9 billion population. We know that food security is a very critical challenge. And yet, Cheryl speaks about an inadequacy when we look at the role of government. What policies should we be seeing at this time to ensure that come 2050, we're actually in a position to feed the population?
Yeah, it's actually incredible to see how much of rural Africa is still dependent on rain-fed agriculture, and how little simple technologies like drip irrigation have spread into huge parts of Africa. So promoting those kind of technologies would be one major role that governments have. The other one is to promote comprehensive agricultural development systems, like in the CADA program that has been ruled out through the AU and NEPAD, and I know Cheryl has been very involved in that. And this is also a great opportunity to finally start talking quality of food.
Right.
The development world has too long focused only on food quantity and growing more and more. And I think this is the opportune time to start to look into the quality of food that is being grown.
We're going to get a bit deeper into the conversation around the quality of food, and I also want to take on Cheryl around, you know, the AU and NEPET structures and whether this is very high level and how is it translating on the ground. But before I do that, I want to go over to Rosemary in Kenya, and I know I'm putting you in an uncomfortable position, Rosemary, as you sit in a key government position. We understand that agriculture doesn't necessarily translate into a nutritionally sufficient population, but as governments, what should ministries of health like yourself be doing to ensure that the agricultural sector working together with that sector actually translates into an effective way of taking on poverty?
What we are doing is to strengthen the linkages between food production and consumption, and also to create awareness that food by itself may not necessarily satisfy the dietary requirement because of the other sociocultural factors. So what we are trying to do is to enlighten the policy makers to look at the nutrition, to look at the food production as part and the parcel of the whole health. What we have done in Kenya is that we have developed a food and a nutrition policy to try and integrate issues of nutrition as related to the health outcome to the food production.
Thank you for that insight. I'm going to come back to Nairobi to get more insights from you. But before I do that, a very important point that you've raised, and this is around the policies that the current government is working on at this time. I want to bring back the technology point that you made. And I perhaps want to throw this question to Zacharias and say, policy and innovation, what else is needed in the pot to ensure that we move closer to a value chain that has nutritional targets integrated into it?
For me, it's about willingness, it's about education, it's about awareness. Of course, we have all the players, we have the government, the NGOs, the academia, and the companies. We have been working together with all these stakeholders in different initiatives. For example, we have been sponsoring this Global Food Security Index developed by the Economist Intelligence Unit. We have been able to measure what are the development of the food security in more than 100 countries in the world. And what you can see from the latest update is that, in fact, Sub-Saharan Africa was the region that most improved. So that's a good signal that, okay, we're coming from the lowest level, but we see that a lot of these initiatives really are paying off.
Zacharias, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, you talk about Sub-Saharan Africa as a collective having improved, but I'm very sure that there are some countries there that have gotten off the mark far quicker than others. What has differentiated those that have a head start from those that are battling to get their house in order?
Yeah, we see, I can give you two examples with this Ethiopia that has really claimed like 17 positions in this ranking, but also we had Botswana very well positioned, and South Africa for sure. And you are right, what's the difference? What makes this different? I think it's a lot of how the people are educated and understand the issues on food security and nutrition, and where are the initiatives? I mean, we see many NGOs really focusing on some countries. We see all the development done in Ethiopia. We see, GAIN working on Mozambique and several projects that Stefan were commenting before to us. We have a 4H. We're now engaging with a new initiative called Imagine Africa, led by the Clinton Global Initiative. So a lot of things, and of course, we're at 60 countries, so we cannot do everything at once. But as soon as we can really take the low-hanging fruits and get this developed, it will work. One
of the thematic areas that keep coming up, and I want to come to you, Stefan, on this question, is this idea of collaboration and a multi-program and a multi-stakeholder approach to dealing with this problem. But are governments enticing private sector players, NGOs, to get involved? Is agriculture and nutrition sexy enough?
I'm not sure if it's sexy enough, but it's certainly important enough.
Right.
There is a recent undertaking 2 years ago. Hillary Clinton was involved in launching a campaign that was called the 1,000 Days. And the 1,000 Days refers to the time from conception to the second birthday of a child, which is the most critical time for micronutrients to reach the body in sufficient amounts. Right on the back of the 1,000-day campaign, there was another huge scale push for multi-stakeholder collaboration, as you say, which is called Scaling Up Nutrition. And the Scaling Up Nutrition is a high-level initiative that is led by the executive director of UNICEF, and it is an example of multi-stakeholder involvement. So if you look at the highest organ of that Scaling Up Nutrition movement, the so-called lead group, it consists of representatives of involved countries, of government, ministers of health, prime ministers, high-level politicians, but also NGOs, development partners like USAID, and the private sector.
Rosemary, coming back to you again in Nairobi, what more can governments do to attract investors, and particularly private sector investors into this place? Are there any things that are happening in Nairobi that you can share?
What the government is doing is to try and create an enabling environment, and also put in place guidelines and also the legal framework, so that if it is the investors, for example, we have the food fortification to address the issue of micronutrient deficiency diseases. And what we are doing is also to work with the international organization like GAIN and support the industries by technically giving them competencies in areas that they are weak, and also supporting them with the equipment. For example, like in our salt iodization, we do support the industries with the sprayers so that they can be able to iodize the salt. We are also, with the new constitution, we have now 2 levels of government, and what we are trying to put in place are the structures so that people coming to us and also us going out, we can be able to attract them. We have also embraced the Sun movement, and we are a member of the Sun movement, and we are right now putting structures. Already we have the structures in place to actually be able to reach out and also integrate and scale up the issues of nutrition within the Kenya government and in the country.
Rosemary, thanks again for that insight. And from one lady to another, Sherrilman, you are the one who spoke about the regional and the continental initiatives, touching on the African Union and NEPAD initiatives. And yet what I'm also hearing from Rosemary is very community level, small scale farming level interventions. Paint that space for us right now. Where are we getting it right, and are we doing enough to ensure that the bottom-up approach is equally matched by the top-down approach?
We still have a lot to learn. Farmers in South Africa are asking nothing for us without us. So they're asking to be involved in the design of programs. Don't design programs and dump them on communities. So there's a lot of dialogue and a learning to engage in dialogue that needs to happen to bridge the gap between our old ways and the new emerging ways of doing business.
Stefan, I saw you nodding your head emphatically as she was speaking. Perhaps you have a point to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that apart from the technologies that I mentioned in my first statement, one of the biggest gaps that we are finding is education. We know that a lot of rural communities do not know the one-on-one on nutrition, and there's also a lot of cultural issues around which foods are aspirational and which are not. And I think that is another huge intervention that all the stakeholders can get involved in improving that level of education around nutrition.
Of course, this is something that you've also touched on, Zacharias, in some of your previous comments. But I want to perhaps ask you to paint a picture of us about the levels of change that we can tap into to begin to turn this picture around? If we look at the fact that in Mozambique we have almost 52% of the population suffering malnutrition, it really says that we still have a very long way to go. So education, I accept, is a very important lever, and policy is another important lever. From a DuPont point of view, where are the other levers of change that need to be tapped?
No, as I mentioned, and we really have to take it very strong that the education is key, and because we have to take this bottom-up approach. So we really have to go to one and explain the basics of nutrition, the basics of how we do better agriculture. And on this food security goals from DuPont, we say that we're going to reach 2 million youngsters and 3 million farmers in terms of education. And we started this last year. We are moving ahead. We already reached 350,000 farmers in these approaches. Sorry, 350 youngsters on this education. And with this new partnership with Imagine Africa, our role will be very much to transfer this knowledge and to raise this awareness, to people know what has to be done. And then we go to micronutrients, we go to how to do best agriculture, how to does not waste what is produced. So there's a lot on this infrastructure also, and because still a lot is waste.
Rosemary, let's perhaps look at some of the work that you do. I would assume that sitting in the Ministry of Health, you obviously working very closely with other ministries to make sure that the nutritional goals are part of their mandates and indeed part of their targets as well. Has that been an easy journey for you?
Our new constitution has made it a bit easy for us because the two levels of government, the national one is going to concentrate on policy and the standard. And because as nutrition, they have also focused for the first time that they have spelled out where the nutrition policy is and which is in health. We are now able to focus on nutrition policy, and one of the things that we are trying to do is to put structures that will enable us to be able to identify and harmonize the activities in the various ministries, and also to put a structure in place for consultation and also for formulation of the same policies, and also be able to review the kind of policies that we have in place and be able to revisit them and see how we can now harmonize the nutrition action in all the ministries. This includes the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Trade because of the industries, the Ministry of Education because we have a good school feeding program, and also a school healthy policy which has got components of nutrition. So right now the way it is in the country is that we are able, the county governments, which are 47, will be able now to implement the policy, and we want to also to see whether the county government can also put the same structures that we shall have or in place. We want to put one at a very high level where the cabinet secretaries can be able to meet and deliberate on nutrition issues, and also another forum where our permanent secretaries can also meet, and then we have an interagency coordination forum and a technical forum which will bring in all the stakeholders from the various, both the private and also the partners and the NGOs that are working in the area of food and nutrition. So we are hoping that maybe with the new vision we shall be able to transform the way we have been doing and approaching nutritional problems.
Maybe pick up on a very key point that Rosemary has made, and she's spoken about the harmonization of policies amongst ministries. Zacharias, from your experience, in the industry of many, many, many years. Is there a best case example that you can say, here is a country, not necessarily in Africa, that has managed to, on the basis of 1, 2, 3 policy changes or program changes, has really managed to turn its situation around when we look at its nutritional targets?
Yeah, I think we can name some cases. For example, in the school food nutrition, I think there are a lot of countries that were very successful in guiding this kind of programs and improving the nutrition through the schools. In the school food programs and so on. I think that's a very powerful, and this needs a lot of coordination between education minister, health minister, all the logistics in place and so on. Another point that is that's somewhat related to nutrition is about obesity, and we have some cases that the legislation, all the regulatory of the food industry has been changed by the government in terms of having more strict levels in terms of sugar, salt, and fat consumption. So all these towards a more balanced food.
And again, through education and awareness, this is how you drive this. I want to touch on a somewhat different aspect, and I want to bring you back, Cheryl, into the conversation on this. I mean, if we look, for example, at the Zimbabwean economy, the minute you had the diversification of the economy, the agricultural industry was the first one to suffer. We've seen a country that was perhaps the bread basket of the continent at one stage, now struggling to resuscitate the agricultural industry. What should African governments be doing as they seek to diversify from an economic front?
The most important thing is to make sure that the market works, and that's often what happens in those crisis situations, is that the pull factors for farmers to actually engage in productive farming in order to create sustainable livelihoods doesn't happen. So it's very important that those linkages happen, and that takes a considerable amount of coordination on the policy side to make sure the incentives are there, on the service delivery side to make sure that farmers are getting the services and support that they need, and on the marketing functions to make sure people guaranteed of fair prices, that they know and can anticipate what's going to happen at the end of the agricultural season.
So, Stefan, I'm going to come, I want to get into your nods, but I also, as you address your nods, I also want you to address the issue of the land issue in Africa, and especially around the politics that surround the land issue, and how that perhaps could be one of the factors that is derailing an agricultural and nutritional agenda.
Yeah, no, I think land ownership and the appropriate use of title deeds is certainly something. If that is not fixed, then there is no long-term incentive for small and medium farmers to actually go about their work. But I would like to come back to one previous point, and that is this multi-sectoral view of nutrition that Rosemary also touched on in terms of coordinating with other ministries. And a part of ministries of education, agriculture and health, I think one of the most important conversations that we need to have is with the ministries of finance, because that is an aspect that is still not fully understood. The World Bank has published a report that countries who have high levels of micronutrient deficiencies lose between 2 and 3% of their GDP due to lower productivity and the overall malnourishment of their workforce. So I think there's a bigger picture here to make current ministers of finance understand the economic benefit of addressing malnutrition, although those benefits might not show until the next generation, when you have a smarter high school.
It's going to take significant leadership. And countries like Senegal, Cambodia, who were able to make a difference in nutrition, there was very strong leadership from the government and from characters within the system who were respected and trusted by the population.
But would you say that that differential is based on a very clear understanding of the correlation between nutritional value and GDP? Or was it something almost an unintended consequence that actually benefited the country?
In Senegal and Cambodia, they were driven by the ministries of health as a need for reducing the burden on healthcare systems and improving the capacity, the human capacity of the country. So it was driven from the nutrition sector, which is quite interesting, rather than the agricultural sector. But strong coordination, what we're seeing through the CAADP process is that countries that make a significant difference and do make progress, there's high-level coordination, either based in the President or the Prime Minister's office, depending on the structure. And where there's strong accountability, so where governments commit to a plan of action, that civil society holds them responsible for carrying out that plan.
I think that's a very, very important argument that you put there. And I want to twist it on its head a little bit and introduce another aspect to the conversation before we go to the break. And I want us to focus on Africa's demographic. In the next few decades, about 65% of the population, if my memory serves me right, will be young people. Mm-hmm. And again, I come back to this question of sexiness. What are we doing right now to ensure that young people are attracted to the agricultural sector, and that instead of picking up other avenues in the education space, they're actually picking up agricultural specialities and skills? What has your experience been sitting at one of South Africa's leading institutions?
The biggest component is for children to be exposed to the range of exciting opportunities in agriculture. It's not just about farming the land, but there's a huge value chain, and there's something for everybody, whether you're interested in the business side, in the finance side, in the growing side, in the community development side, the engineering. And once young people start to see those, they start to see their opportunities for diversifying their careers. And many of the people also have a real passion to serve their own people. So.
Zachary, do you think that we're doing enough from a brand management point of view to ensure that agriculture and the broader nutritional debate is not seen as the farmer with his boots and his fork, and that there's actually a much broader value chain that can be tapped into?
Yeah, I think we are doing some, but we can do more, because it's a way to people there to perceive what are the opportunities and what are the options. I mean, you can work in not only the farm, you can be a food engineer, you can be a nutritionist, you can work in several areas. And this is very important, because no doubt Africa is on the spot, food and agriculture are on the spot, so people will get attracted by this. It's a matter really to get and expose it.
Before we go to the break, I just want to plant a seed, and excuse the pun, for where I want to take the conversation when we come back. I want us to look at African countries and their economic growth policies, and whether they are perceiving agriculture to be a key industry as well. And because what we seem to be seeing is a heavy reliance on the financial sectors and other sectors that may not necessarily be conducive of, even reflective of, the capacity and the competitive edge that we may have. But what we're going to do is that we're going to take a short commercial break now, and we'll see you straight after this.